Welcome to Face Values, the podcast where we peel back the layers of cosmetic surgery and skincare to help you understand how your skin is aging and what you can do about it. I'm Dr. David Jack. I'm a cosmetic doctor and skincare brand founder. I'm based in London. I've got clinics in London and Edinburgh. I've got a real interest in just understanding more about how the skin ages. So I'm going to be joined by lots of guests who are real experts in the field. So I hope you enjoy and keep tuning in. In this episode, Salima and I are going to be talking about dermal fillers and how they can be used to make you look a bit better, but without making you look like you've been blown up,
like you're a
balloon
fish.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my main worry about fillers. Because I've got quite a round face anyway. You know, at the point that I need fillers, am I going to look like a puffer fish?
I mean, there is a risk of it if you do it too much. There always is. But fillers have to be done in a way that is just really replacing volume, in my opinion. I think sometimes when doctors start to do things where they're trying to create structures in a face that has maybe not had those structures and then change the proportions substantially, it's always going to start to look a bit weird.
Yeah, and alien-like. Like creating cheekbones.
Exactly.
Trying to elongate.
And it was kind of fashionable for a while that people would go on training courses for, say, one part of the body. So they'd go on a chin filler training course, or they'd go on like a temple filling course, or they'd do a jaw course. And it would just be teaching people to do that. So you'd see this whole period of time when people would go to fairly inexperienced practitioners
and have a great
just
chin.
have huge chins.
That's so funny.
And then I'd see them in clinic and they'd be wanting to remove it because they look ridiculous. Yes. So it has to be done in a way where with fillers that you're just using them to replace lost volume.
Yeah.
You're thinking about the face as a whole, obviously. I mean, this is fairly basic stuff that goes without saying, but surprisingly few people do it in this way.
Well, you say basic, but I mean, considering, what I've seen just in trashy magazines, even, you can see
some of the most expensive practitioners do things in this way, and it just is very, it makes people look very weird.
But you know what? Look, this is what I really like about you and how you work, is that, well, one, you're pretty honest and you're still diplomatic with people, but you don't promise they can look like somebody they dream of looking, that you're not going to change their face into something else. And that's about their own psychology, isn't it? If they're not happy with how they look.
Well, this is the key. Yeah, exactly. And it's identifying that early on so that you're not going down this rabbit hole of trying to make somebody who has, say, body dysmorphia or something try to achieve something that they're never going to achieve.
Yes.
Which is often, I think, the mistake that a lot of people make is that they do kind of, somebody brings a photograph of somebody in and they're like, oh, they've got good cheekbones or something, and then so we'll put a bit more in your cheek. And they come back the next week and they want a bit more, and then the next week they want a bit more, people just do that. So it really is just about kind of thinking about how if that person firstly is the right candidate for doing these things at all.
Yes, you're not going to make me into J-Lo, sadly.
Yeah, exactly. And if they actually need the things, and most people will lose a bit of volume, and most people kind of from sort of say mid to late 30s onwards will have a little bit of volume change that could be addressed with a tiny bit of filler. Yeah. And then obviously that increases with the as the decades go by, the amount of volume maybe that they've lost increases, obviously. And it's about doing things in the appropriate way for that age and that person's own facial structure. Yes. Rather than trying to chase like divine proportions. Right. And again, there was this period of time where maybe the training courses for doctors and injectors had moved away from doing individual face parts to how to make a perfectly proportioned face. Right. And then with that person's bone structure, trying to create these perfect proportions that maybe like as one model has will not suit that person's face either, and then they end up just looking like they've had tons of filler done to achieve these like thigh ratios and things.
Yes. But also it's about realism, isn't it? And like what our everyday life is. Yes, I would love to look like J-Lo and have J-Lo's life, but I have to understand that that is not for me.
Yeah.
And so we can do
if you
things.
had similar bone structure and
Yeah,
stuff,
sure.
then it could be.
Then it could be, but it's not. It's not.
Yeah,
So I can't come to you with a picture of her
Yeah.
and say, "Make me look like her," because
Exactly.
it's just not gonna happen.
Exactly.
And that has to be more about an acceptance, doesn't it? Of
Yeah.
we feel like we have accessibility to all these celebs these days compared to
Exactly.
20, 30 years ago. But no, they are still light years away from the rest of us, actually.
Sure. I mean, and a lot of these celebrities have done facelifts, and they've done lots of like
crazy stuff.
treatments over many, many, many years, and a syringe of filler here and there is probably not going to achieve that.
Yeah.
But in saying that, there is very definitely a place for dermal fillers in the world of kind of rejuvenating treatments, because everybody loses volume over time, and if they're used in a sensible way, then they can have very, very nice effects. Partly that also has to do with the type of filler that's used.
Okay.
Also where the filler is placed in the skin as well. So generally speaking, if you're doing revolumizing fillers, you want to actually be right on the surface of the bone, so that filler is underneath the layer of the muscle, so the SMAS layer. And I know we did the podcast with George the other day, and who's a facelift surgeon, so you should listen to that episode as well. He was talking about this SMAS layer, which is the muscle layer of facial that's underneath the skin. And if people place filler on top of that muscle, so superficially on the skin, then what happens is when you're smiling or you're making any facial movement, the filler actually moves on top of the muscle.
Oh, so
it moves with it. Yeah. So it always looks weird when people are expressing themselves. And also because generally fillers are made from a thing called hyaluronic acid, which draws water to itself. It draws water to the surface of the skin, so you become a lot more puffy superficially in the tissues. So if you're doing fillers and it's for a kind of lifting, anti-aging, revolumization purpose, they should be injected very deep onto the surface of the bone so that the muscle moves on top of the filler. So that your facial expressions are normal. You're just replacing the lost volume under the muscle where the lever arm of the muscle has changed a bit, so that you maintain normal facial movements with filler.
And also, particularly with someone like me with a rounder face, you'd have to be very careful, wouldn't you?
Totally.
Whereas someone with a much more angular face, you could get away with more.
Maybe.
Yeah,
exactly.
Like
but for you, it'd be really important not to inject anywhere near the fat pads, which sit superficially in the face, on top of the ones that are on. Yeah, otherwise you'd just start to look really puffy.
Balloony.
But it would have to be very minimal volumes for you, just in very strategic positions underneath the muscles, almost so much that you wouldn't really notice that much of a change.
Right, sure.
And with fillers, it's always important to do a little, let it settle, and then add a bit more, rather than whacking in tons. And
when do you see the change when you've been injected with filler?
Yeah, it usually takes about a couple of days to all settle in. So you can be a little bit, so you'd inject, next day you might be a wee bit puffy.
Yeah.
That can be reduced by sleeping slightly head up after filler or taking antihistamine before you go to bed on the night of the treatment.
Okay.
And then usually the next morning you're a bit swollen, and then it takes about 5 days usually for good quality fillers to kind of integrate into your tissues and settle down and everything.
Okay.
So I'd say by about a week you're looking quite good.
So can you do filler and Botox at the same time?
Yeah, I'm almost 90% of the time we'll do a combination.
Both. There's no reason not to.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Fine.
And it just has to be done very carefully. There are other risks with fillers, which you hear about, and you hear about these disaster cases. There's a very small risk that filler can be injected into blood vessels and cause skin damage. In horrendous cases, fillers have been known to cause necrosis, and blindness and things like that. So it just really has to be done by somebody who knows how to deal with side effects of fillers.
Yes, and can spot there's an issue.
Yeah, exactly. Because if things like that are treated straight away, then the outcomes are fine.
Yeah.
It just is when they're not recognised straight away, and then you leave it, then the blood flow is cut off, and then it's left for a couple of days. Then this tissue starts to break down. So it can be a horrible thing. But generally speaking, if it's a doctor doing it, then they should have been trained on how to deal with that sort of side effect. Other side effects are things like bruising, asymmetry. Sometimes if you've got a wee bit of asymmetry of the bones, then that will look a wee bit more obvious for a little little while after doing some filler.
Oh, right.
Because it just kind of amplifies that.
Oh, sure, it would do, wouldn't it?
when
Yeah.
it's swollen. So I would always give filler a wee bit of time to settle in.
How long will it last?
Depends on the type of filler. So the fillers I use usually will last for about a year to 18 months, the hyaluronic
Quite a
acid
while.
ones. So they're quite, yeah. And I don't know if you remember reading, and we talked to Alice Hart Davis, who did an MRI of her face.
Oh, yes.
She
It migrated, hadn't it?
Well, I think it maybe migrated, but it was more that she'd had filler like years before.
Right.
And it was still there on her MRI. And I mean, it's not really that surprising because when I see people that have seen filler, like you can, even years down the line, and I've had it a couple of times, you can always tell if there's a bit of filler still there.
You?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And particularly if it's been overdone, and you can really see that person's face has really changed, even if they've not had filler for the last 5 years. So I think that what you do get this sort of residual volume that's left over the kind of longer term with fillers as well, even if they're the ones that are broken down.
Right.
But
whereas Botox
completely wears off, particularly if you're using lighter doses.
Yeah, because it's a muscle relaxant.
Yeah, because it's muscle. It's relaxing the muscle. But fillers will last for a bit longer. In some people than expected, particularly the higher volume sort of used.
Yeah, so you've got to take your time to work out why you want to do it, who's doing it for you. And it's about an investment, isn't it?
Exactly.
So is it worth the money? Yes, it is worth the money because I trust this person and this is something that I'm going to have for potentially over a year.
Exactly. And the key is just doing a little to start with, let it settle, see how it is, maybe add a bit more if you don't see that much change. And it's always better for people to be slightly underwhelmed by the result and want a bit more.
Okay.
Than feel overwhelmed and like they hate it. So.
And in terms of cost, how does that work? I'm sorry if this is too direct a question about money, but I mean, I would be tempted to come and do a huge amount because it would be cheaper just to come once.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So, well, for me, it depends. Everybody's slightly different in the way they charge. So I charge per syringe.
Right.
So you're basically, it's like you have this number of syringes, then this is what you pay.
Okay.
And it means that there's not that pressure to
That's
do
what I was
loads.
wondering.
And some people will do, say, a full face rejuvenation and just give a fixed price for that.
Yeah.
Which is just a different way of doing it, I guess. But
you stick with syringes.
I stick with
transparent
syringes. It's quite transparent.
Well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's fillers.
Brilliant.
Cool. So if you've enjoyed this episode and have any questions for me, you can reach me on my Instagram, which is at Dr. David Jack, or you can email clinic@drdavidjack.com. And if you want to ask me any questions in a live setting, I host live masterclasses once a month. You can access these through my website. You can sign up to our mailing list for these. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe on any podcast platform that you're listening to. And I hope to see you in the next episode.